Welcome to the Reinventing Education Podcast. I'm Rob McLeod, joined as always by Brennan O'Leary. Here on the podcast, we believe there are three types of school: expert, coach, and counselor. You're a match for one of them and likely have a bit of an allergy to the other two. For more details on what we mean by those three types of school, if this is a new idea to you, go back and check out episode 124 titled Start Here. Brendan, beautiful to see you.
Good to see you too, Robert.
Today's topic, we're going to look at the staffing and organizational structure and hierarchy across the three types of school.
Now you're talking my language.
A simpler way to talk about these complex organizations is our idea that each of the three types of school could be symbolized using a shape. And the shapes that we use are the pyramid to describe the hierarchy in an expert school, a star to clarify what is going on in the hierarchy of a coach school, and a circle to represent a flattened hierarchy in the counselor school. So Brennan, maybe you can set the table by talking first a little bit about the pyramid hierarchy of the expert school, and then a little about the star-shaped hierarchy of a coach school.
Indeed. And so, yeah, as you described, we're all very familiar with that idea of the pyramid, and that's what those are traditional expert leaning schools. That's a good way to visualize. You get the head teacher at the top, often the vice principal just underneath, and then the teachers who are peers often on that next level down. And traditionally, those might be the only three sorts of roles that existed within the school. There's clear roles and responsibilities for each layer. And because of that, there is a lot of autonomy afforded because everybody is expected to pull their weight and understand what's happening and their role within the overall hierarchy. Because of that, there's a lot of trust. However, if somebody is a weak link or letting down the side, it can really hurt the entire organization. Traditionally, maybe things like job descriptions weren't written out. The idea of what you did was embedded in the structure of the school and the institutional knowledge. Sometimes within these hierarchies, there's tension when unwelcome change comes around, unless it kind of fits in with the good common sense plans of the school as a whole. And so that idea of trust and common sense, duty, responsibility is very much at the core of this style of structure and hierarchy. If we move over to the coach-centered approach, the STAR kind of type of organization, we still have a layered hierarchy, but decision making might be a little bit more distributed. Even though some roles and voices still hold a lot more influence than others. Leadership starts to move into more kind of variations on each of those levels of the hierarchy from the expert-centered approach. So now we might see heads of departments and multiple vice principals that work together as teams on each level of that hierarchy. We might see more and more specialist teachers coming out, especially as you get into secondary school, middle school, high school, and so on. We might have more student teachers and interns and other variations on those types of roles. We might see an expansion into other types of roles entirely, such as pastoral roles or special educational need teachers, educational psychologists, counselors, nurses, and other types of support staff. We might see classroom assistants coming in and language support teachers. We might even start to look at people that face outwards from the school, like admissions coordinators and social media and marketing and all of those things. So this specialization, as we get into that kind of star hierarchy in the coach-centered school, allows us to have that expertise in a far wider range of choices. But of course, you lose some of that, maybe that idea of the strong roles and responsibilities within the hierarchy. It gets a little bit more complex, maybe a little bit more difficult to understand on some levels. And then, of course, because of that, roles and responsibilities begin to be written down and really codified strongly in that coach-centered approach. When we look at the idea of change, there's still a friction in terms of change. Change is difficult for all of us, but in this coach paradigm, we're looking at setting plans and goals, and the tension there might come less from the change itself and more from the fact that we're not sure whether we're going to be successful, and there's stresses within what strategies do we use and how do we define success, and how do we deal with the lack of achieving our goals. So things like that. But yeah, so two very different approaches, two very different ways to approach the hierarchies of school. And if you've been with us before, you know that as we move over into the counselor-centered approach with a circle or a flattened hierarchy of power and responsibility, leadership, things start to move in very different directions. So, Robert, what are some of the things that we might see in a counselor-centered schools hierarchy?
Well, let's connect this to the shape. So we see in the expert, we've got the pyramid, the very clear hierarchy. As we move into the coach's star, it's as though that pyramid at the very top shrinks a little bit and almost like fans out to make the points of the star, showing that there's layers. There's a top point, more in the middle points, and some lower points. More democratic approach to a hierarchy. Some voices still have much more say than others, but we're spreading out that hierarchy and decision making across more of the school. Well, when we get to the when we get to the counselor's circle, it's like we're taking all of those points and like smoothing and rounding them off to distribute them or share them across the whole school. So we're using this image of this circle because in a counselor school, there is no hierarchy of power and all voices are equal. All voices have equity. All voices have shared power to influence what's happening in the school. And when we say all voices are equal, we mean this truly without a hierarchy, like the voice of a student, a staff member, a family member, or even a community member all have equal say if they're willing to show up and do the work and be involved in the decision-making processes in the school. And these decision-making processes are driven by consent. So it's the consent of those in the groups, the idea of coming up with something that works for everybody and then consenting to it is what's at the core of this hierarchy. It's not a role. The role of someone at the top of a hierarchy or having more influence is now being replaced by these processes for decision making and finding consent. So these roles begin to disappear in favor of all people having their needs met. And as we've discussed in some of our previous episodes, which we can link back to, you might still have someone who's officially called the head of school or a principal or a leader. More likely, those kind of responsibilities and roles might even be taken over by a rotating group of people or different people over time, or just possibly someone is just there to kind of fulfill the role of the head of school for things outside of the school, like the contact person for ministries or, whatever. But there is a chance that there's not even a head of school within a fully sociocratic counselor approach to organization. Teachers are essentially there as support for the students to help them along the steps of their student-led inquiries. So their actual role or kind of authority is no longer the kind of collaboration role of the coach or the autonomy role of the expert. Here they are there basically to just serve as negotiators with the students to explore into different fields or different areas. Sorry, just moving down. Yeah, I guess I said those other 2 points earlier. So Brennan, this is a fairly revolutionary idea because when we think of school, we tend to think of buildings and then we probably think of principals and teachers. Kind of instantly we start to think of hierarchies, decision-making, power within the schools, those sorts of things. This idea of the counselor approach of a circle or flattened hierarchy where all voices are equal. Let's talk about the babies in bathwater. First, what are the good things about this?
Yeah, I mean, as we've discussed in previous episodes, as you start to to look into those relationships and why we have each role and how they serve those inquiries, the very open inquiries for students, we start to see that all voices have a potential to influence the situation in the school. This idea of empowerment, this idea that your voice is important. Every single person, actions at the center of what we're doing. You can change. You can make a change within the school. For yourself and to the community, and that is true of every single member of the community. Whether they are a teaching staff or a student or in a different sort of support role. And again, because of that, all roles potentially done by all people in the school. That doesn't mean that just randomly assigned. Through the negotiation, the consent people, there may be rotations, there may be different people doing different roles. But we get beyond the idea that, that's not my job, that's not my, part of my thing. More towards, is that something that I can help with? Is there somebody else in the community that we can bring in to help us do that even better? So, in that sense, it really does open up to be like, well, what is your capacity here as a person within here? And that if you're stretched or if you need that support, there's other people there. So it's very much this idea that every single person can bring their whole self and, bring everybody in. And then again, because of that, you're not limited to your contribution. And maybe within the expert-centered approach and the coach-centered approach, you have a very specific set of roles and expectations, and you really it may not even be welcomed for you to step outside of those. Here, that disappears, and you are whatever contribution you can make or want to make to the individuals and the community, that's welcomed. That is a part of the underlying philosophy of this type of school, that you should bring your entire self to this, and you're no longer limited by what was expected by your role or what's written in your job description. Anything else to add to those positives, Rob, or do you want to move on to the not so positives?
Let's move on to the not so positive bathwaters. You could say this about all three types. But if someone is not pulling their weight in the school, you may find yourself with a lot on your plate. Now, the reason that could be the case in a counselor school is it's potentially easy to say like, oh, I'm very busy, or I don't have the time or capacity to participate perhaps in one of the circles or one of the processes. And without some vigilance, there's no real checks and balances. Because the schools are so adaptive and, able to change in order to meet the needs of people, the responsibilities aren't necessarily written down, and there might not be the oversight, because there is a belief that, well, we all value meaning, we all value consent-based decision-making, we're all equal, we're all in for this, right? And we do run the risk of experiencing a bit of a tragedy of the commons where people might not be pulling their equal weight. In a similar way, to some degree, we run the risk of losing a hierarchy of competence, as all voices have space and the group must consent as a group. And this just simply means that time will be spent on people with bad ideas, and there's a chance that good, or perhaps the best ideas, may get watered down through the process of needing to find consent from the group. So we do run the risk, although there are advantages to this, kind of checks and balance of making sure the group is in accordance with it. The one downfall of this is an individual's idea, which may be great, may be watered down or passed over or modified to a great deal to make it less effective in order to receive the consent of the group. So pros and cons, as there are to all of these three. But thanks, Brennan, for this exploration of the experts pyramid, coaches star, and digging a little deeper into the counselor's circle.
Indeed, hope it was helpful. And anyone out there listening, reach out to us and let's continue this conversation.
Yeah, get in touch. Let us know which of these three you are in, which of these three you want to be in, and if your version of this school that you're in now is a healthy, functioning, good version of it, or a not so healthy, not so functioning version. Thanks,
Rob.
Brendan.